Hi everyone, this is Pranav S versus Aarnav G. So Pranav versus Aarnav, let's dive into it. Oh, this is played on the 20th of October, so term 4, 2018. Let's go. E4, knight c6. Okay, so right from move 1, I'm not too happy with Black's opening here. I mean, White can just grab a massive center, just d4, and this knight is kind of silly placed on c6. Now, you want to start by chucking a pawn in the middle. These knight c6, knight f6 moves, they're just generally quite weak. I don't like it at all. I know it is an opening, but I would highly recommend, particularly for young players, to first learn how to chuck pawns in the middle and maintain a big center. And then once you become quite experienced and much older, then you might want to start playing around with these knight c6 sort of openings. Okay, let's see how it worked. White didn't play d4, White played knight f3, which kind of lets Black off the hook because Black can now play e5, and yeah, we've got just a normal king's pawn opening, you know, Raul Lopez or Guaco Piano or something like that. Instead, he played knight f6, knight. Okay, this is just asking for trouble. White just threw his pawn in the middle, perfect answer, and these knights are just really silly. The knight really needs to jump into d5 here, and it's just looking really bad. You know, after c4, d4, White, you know, I mean, I'll just go into these variations. You know, c4, the knight has to move. D4, look at White's center, it's amazing, and the threat of just d5 with an even bigger center is just, whoops, it's just devastating. And these knights are still in very silly positions with nowhere to go. Black played knight h5. That looks very bad because the knight has no escape square. Well, f4 is the escape square. So White played d4, which is good. So now the bishop guards the escape square. The threat is just g4 winning a piece. I don't know how Black's going to survive this. He tried d5. That means the bishop is now guarding g4. And yeah, I mean, this knight is just so bad. There must be a way for White to take advantage of this. The engine is suggesting c4 is a great move, and that is a great move. It's pretty awesome, actually. I like c4, that the pawn doesn't dare take, because then you've got d5, and you know this pawn gets taken back eventually anyway. Moves like knight here are just dreadful because of things like queen a4 check. Yeah, it's just c4 is great. And this knight is just out of play and terrible and on the brink of getting trapped at every single point. And if this knight ever moves away, it's trapped. It looks like White tried to go directly for winning the knight and played knight g5, which I think does let Black off the hook a little bit because he can play g6 to defend the knight, and the knight has his g7 square. He's still got some pretty awful looking pieces, but he's kind of getting out of it. So bishop b5 was played now, and I think the last chance for White would have been something like bishop e2, I think, just threatening to win a pawn by grabbing the knight and forcing the knight onto a silly square. I think that's probably best. I think knight g5 was not the right way to handle this position. C4 definitely is. And even something like h3, just threatening g4, is pretty good. It stops this bishop pinning the knight to the queen and threatens to win a knight at the same time. So it's not a wasted tempo. Quite often you don't have time to play a useful move like h3 to keep pieces out of g4 because it just wastes the move. But here it doesn't waste a move because you're threatening to win a piece. Okay, so knight g5, g6, bishop b5. I think the position is probably about level now. I mean, White's a bit better because White's got advanced center pawn here. Maybe White's a bit better. I don't know. f6 can be played, and this can be traded off. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is just dead equal. Bishop d7. That's a blunder. At the corner of my eye, I saw the change in the engine's analysis. Whenever an engine jumps like this, you know a massive tactical blunder has made. So, you know, at the moment it says it's equal or close to equal, and then after bishop d7, bang, 2.44. white is winning by. So what white's just basically won a piece, and it's pretty straightforward because and white saw it. Well done. Queen f3 just threatens mate right here. Also threatens the pawn here. And how does black stop all this? Okay, the solution he came up with was bishop f5, which allows the queen to defend d5 and blocks the queen from taking on f7. One massive problem with this is though g4 with a pawn fork. More than the pawn fork as well. It's kind of a pin. The bishop doesn't dare move because the queen comes in here, or the knight comes here with a knight fork. It's pretty much all over. The game's gone right now. I'm surprised. How did it last 57 moves? Okay, well, we'll find out. Okay, f6. Okay, that's clever. So one of his pieces on pre, he counterattacks this knight, and it does require a bit of careful play. White has to take the correct things. If white takes this, for instance, black can then take this, and the position's back to equal again. So if white takes the wrong way, things aren't so good. And if white decides to do something like this, it doesn't actually help because of pawn here. And now it doesn't even matter if white takes the right way. Black's going to get his piece back, and it's kind of got a position he can defend properly. So f6 is very clever by black. White did take the correct way. He took the bishop, and after pawn takes knight, yeah, he just took this pawn here, and the threat is to just take the knight. It's also threatening to come into here, and it pretty much forces h takes g6, and yeah, this is doubled isolated pawns on a half-open file. You know, I mean, just those weaknesses alone are enough to give white a winning advantage. But you also factor in the incredibly weak king and the fact that the king can't get to safety quickly, and white's just got an overwhelmingly great position. Here, just bishop d3, just hitting this pawn here is guaranteed to win at least a pawn. Because he can't even defend the pawn, because if you defend the pawn, you just rip the pawn off, remove all the defender, and then grab the knight afterwards. And a move like knight here, you just rip the knight off, then grab the pawn check, and then grab the second pawn. You know, both these pawns just fall so quickly. Bishop d3 is really good. The move played was e6. I mean, the idea is fine, you know, checkmate. So there's a threat behind that. However, I think it probably lets black wriggle his way out. You know, maybe he can play knight f6 here and block the queen off and get the queen out of danger. That's the second best move according to the engine. According to the engine, queen d6 is the best move. Just create an escape square on d8 for the king. And apparently, queen f7 check is nothing because king d8, and somehow the engine thinks black is doing okay. I mean, white is still winning, but black is doing okay. The main idea is that the knight is no longer pinned, so there's a threat of just taking here, which hits the bishop and threatens a knight fork. Whoops. And yeah, so this queen taking this pawn isn't really an issue, and this pawn here is overextended. So yeah, queen d6, and yeah, Aarnav found it. Good stuff, guys. Every other move was just horrible, was just terrible. Even my suggestion wasn't very good because everything falls. But yeah, queen d6, that's great defensive play by black here. Now white decided to rip this knight off first by playing bishop takes c6, whereas sending the queen straight into f7 was definitely the way to play. The queen took back. Now the c2 pawn is on. Queen f7 check, king d8, and the queen took on g6, which defends the e pawn and defends the c pawn in the one move. And here, according to the engine, it's equal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. However, there are serious problems here, like rook here, for instance. You know, skewering the king to the pawn, and once this pawn falls, it falls with check, and this king is wide open and not getting safe very quickly. This pawn could disappear off the board, but does that actually help white? I mean, if his king castles, it'll be on an open g file. So yeah, Black's actually wriggled out of most of his mess, and he can look forward to winning this pawn later on. Not right now because he loses his queen. And yeah, the move suggested by the engine is knight g7, which puts an extra attacker on this pawn here. Also, knight f6 is considered decent by the engine. The move played, however, knight f4, not as good. It loses a point of material or so, and White played it quite well. He took the knight as he was supposed to. G takes, and now queen f5, very strong move. It takes away the possibility of rook here winning this pawn, because the queen is now hitting the bishop, and the queen is now eyeing f4, defending the pawn. It actually, and defends c2 all at once. That's a really good move. Okay, bishop h6 was played, so Black decided to try and keep his pawn alive and maybe introduce the possibility of rook here. His main issue is trying to get this rook into the game. He's got some problems here. It's going to take a long time to play something like b6, king c8, king b7 and get that rook out. If he does manage to get it out, this pawn here is going to look very, very weak. Okay, knight c3, developing, fair enough. Rook f8, hitting the queen. Queen takes d5. There's no way to save that pawn, I don't think. Queen takes, knight takes, c6. This is good play by both players, actually. Knight b4, rook f6. And that pawn is doomed. And what's the material going to be? White will be a pawn up, but he's left with isolated pawn here and here, although this one's a passed pawn. Rook g1. Let's just race through these moves. There's a lot of moves here. Rook takes e6 check just looked good, taking a pawn with check, but the engine didn't like it. The engine wanted to play king c7 and get the other rook into play, and I guess that makes sense. Oh, of course the engine doesn't like it. There's rook here check and you lose your rook in the corner. It's a simple. Oh no, but it's check. So it is a bit strange. King f1, king c7. Yeah, don't know why the engine didn't like it. I'm not going to dwell too much on it because there's a lot of moves still to go in this game. Rook e1 offering a swap off. He took it. Yeah, kind of had to. Now we reach an ending where White is a pawn up, but converting this ending is going to be very tricky. A5 helps White, I think. Chases the knight to where it wants to go. I think you got to get the rook into play. You know, rook d8 and hit the pawn. Yeah, on the half open file, it's got to be the way to play. And the idea is after rook d8, you can try and pry this pawn open with moves like e5 or c5 at the right time. Yeah, and maybe moves like f3 with the bishop combined with the rook. Rook d8 is definitely the move. a5 I think helps White by chasing the knight exactly to where it wants to go. Now rook d8 should have been played a move earlier, I think. Just chasing the knight to where it wants to go is just giving White a free move. Rook g6 is good. Now rook g6. I don't think trading pieces is the way to play this. You can understand the decision. I mean, who wants to leave their rook on a passive square like h8? But I think you had to do it. I think Black had to do it. This way, if you sit on h8 instead, you could retreat the bishop and then maybe grab the passed pawn here instead. You're going to lose this pawn here, but at least you get rid of the passed pawn, and this pawn is not passed because there's an e pawn here. So I don't like rook d6. I think swapping rooks off is just playing straight into White's hands. Rook takes d6, king takes d6. Okay, now Black's king is getting very active. c3, king e4. Not sure about that. Maybe the king should have gone this way instead. c4. e4 just loses a pawn, surely. Just if you go king e4. In fact, that's exactly what happened in the game. And you just lost the b pawn. And the a pawn looks like it's going to fall. King went the wrong way. I mean, you can understand the decision. The idea is to protect the f pawn, and that frees the bishop up so the bishop can roam. It just unfortunately loses to a knight fork. you know, maybe a move like b6 first, just guard the c5 square, then maybe move the king into e4, but not just straight out king e4. That just loses the game here. King c4 or b6 would be the moves I'm looking for. So let's see what happened. King e4, knight c5, yeah, and now I think just an easy win for white. I think that one mistake, you know, king e4 took a position which was very close and very tense and just lost it then and there on the spot. Yeah, game over. I don't think Pranav is going to mess it up from here. So he loses this pawn. He plays a4, but the knight just goes back to c5. Maybe a3 here. Black played e5. You can understand that decision, actually. E takes, king takes. But white now has 2 pawns up, and you know, here one of them, he's got 2 pass pawns, one on the a file, one on the h file, and these 2 pawns are isolated, and the king can't really protect both of them. f3, I like this move, putting the pawn on the white square, the opposite color square of the bishop, and fixing this pawn in place. I think that was really good. King c4, knight c3. The engine's analysis is kind of useless in a position like this. Bishop g7 now, yeah, if the bishop swaps for the knight, it's pretty much game over. Sorry. If the bishop takes the knight, it's game over for black. So bishop g7 doesn't actually threaten anything. You know, there's no way on earth this bishop's going to take this knight. So in light of that, maybe I mean, as long as he's putting the bishop there because he's planning to reroute it to maybe here, even there's no good, because then how does it eye the h pawn? Maybe a move like bishop here is better, and the idea is the bishop eyes h4 like this and stops the pawn from coming to h4, and it can like drop all the way back to d8, where it can stop h4 and stop the queenside pawns at the same time. When you got a bishop like this and you're facing off against, you know, passed pawns, you kind of want to put it in a position where it can defend both sides of the board at once. G7 it doesn't really do that from. But what it's doing there is it is stopping the knight from moving, because otherwise the b pawn disappears. H3 was played. Why not h4? I think h4 is much better. Just get this pawn, get this pawn all the way to h5. If this king tries to run over to stop it, then this pawn starts running up the board. Definitely bishop g5 here is much better, and then you can answer a5, you know, a4 by playing bishop here, and the bishop stopping both pawns. It's doing a pretty good job of stopping both pawns. Okay, well, is it? I mean, you got to be careful of sacks like this. The bishop takes here, the pawn might be able to run through and be unstoppable, but I don't think it's going to have any trouble stopping it. You can get back in time and stop both pawns. Okay, so what actually happened was this: bishop g7, h3. Yeah, h4 was better. That gives the bishop the opportunity to go to f6 and stop this pawn. Bishop f6 is the move, and the bishop can drop back to d8 and keep both pawns covered. Instead, he played king b4. Yeah, I mean, that lets the white king get active into d3. It also lets this pawn charge up the board. Both moves that you don't want having happen. So white chose king d3. h4 is even stronger. Just getting this pawn up the board as fast as possible. But yeah, king d3 is good. c5. Once again, you got to play bishop f6. You got to stop this pawn. Don't let the pawn get far, further than you have to let it get. c5, king c2. White's trying to slow play this. There's no need, but okay, so pawn up. Now knight d5 check was played, and yeah. So the whole idea behind king here is to threaten knight there, win the pawn. Oh, whoops. And in this position, what does white do here? He doesn't have time to play. Well, he can't play bishop here now because he loses his thing. c4 is actually a mistake. C5 was a mistake. The pawn here was actually doing a good job of taking squares away from the knight. And running the king over to b4 was a mistake as well. But we've already gone over this. Okay, so now after this, it's really game over. Black had some chances to put up resistance, but now that black is 3 pawns down, their game is over. He tried king d4. That just loses a piece. Simple knight fork. Yeah, and the game's over. We can just race through the rest of these moves. White even sacrifices the knight. The rest of the moves are quite irrelevant. And the game stopped here. I'm assuming black resigned here. Yeah, it was actually a very close game. It came right down to the end game, and I think black, did very well to take his difficult position and make it hard for white by getting his king centralized. But drop a pawn here, drop a pawn there, drop another pawn there, and you eventually lose the game. I think a very instructive game, and I hope everyone listening in learnt quite a few things about this particular, about the positions we reached in this game. Okay, thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.